Jessica Hartwell stood in the spacious kitchen of her Boston brownstone, staring at the cream-colored envelope that had arrived that morning. The paper felt heavy between her fingers. Expensive. Michael Chen's name was embossed in elegant gold lettering on the return address. Her fiancé's business partner, the man she'd met exactly 3 times in the 2 years she and Michael had been together. "You got yours too?" Michael appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie after another 14-hour day at the firm. His dark hair was disheveled, and exhaustion lined his handsome face. At 34, he was the youngest senior partner at Chen & Associates, the boutique investment firm that had made both him and Richard Chen wealthy beyond measure. "I didn't realize Richard was getting married," Jessica said, turning the invitation over. The wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks away at the Essex Harbour Yacht Club in Manchester by the Sea, one of the most exclusive venues on the North Shore. Michael crossed the kitchen and poured himself a scotch from the decanter on the counter. "Neither did I until yesterday. Apparently it's been a whirlwind romance. He met her 4 months ago." Jessica raised an eyebrow. 4 months? That's fast. "That's Richard." Michael took a long sip. "When he wants something, he moves quickly. It's what made him successful." There was something in Michael's voice that made Jessica pause, a tension she couldn't quite identify. She'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor over the past 2 years, the way his jaw tightened when deals went sideways, how his eyes went distant when he was calculating risks. This was different. "You don't approve," she said. "It's not about approval. It's complicated." He set the glass down harder than necessary. "Richard's bride-to-be, Elena Martinez, has a background that's unconventional." Jessica waited. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows of their Beacon Hill home, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and approaching rain. "She was homeless when he met her," Michael continued. "Living in a shelter in Dorchester. Richard was doing some charity work there, photo op stuff for the company's public image, and apparently they connected." "That's actually kind of romantic," Jessica said, though she noticed Michael's discomfort growing. "It would be, except Richard's father is furious. The Chen family built their wealth over 3 generations. Old money, old expectations. Marrying someone from Elena's background goes against everything his family stands for." Jessica folded her arms. "Sounds like Richard's brave for following his heart." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it, or foolish. His father's threatening to restructure the company, freeze Richard out of major decisions. It could affect all of us. He met her eyes, including our wedding plans. They'd been engaged for 6 months, planning a spring ceremony at the same yacht club where Richard and Elena would marry. The connection between their professional lives and personal futures was suddenly uncomfortably clear. "We have to go," Michael said. "Show support. Richard needs to see that we're behind him, that his decision won't isolate him from everyone who matters." Jessica nodded slowly, but something nagged at her. The way Michael described Elena felt clinical, detached, as if she were a business problem rather than a person. She wanted to believe it was just stress, the pressure of navigating office politics while Richard's family drama threatened the firm's stability. "I'll RSVP yes for both of us," she said. Michael kissed her forehead. "Thank you. I know these things are tedious, but it matters." As he headed upstairs to change, Jessica looked at the invitation again. Elena Martinez. She wondered what kind of woman could capture Richard Chen's attention so completely that he'd risk his family's approval and his business relationships, and she wondered why the thought of meeting her made her inexplicably uneasy. The next morning, Jessica sat in her office at Boston Children's Hospital, where she worked as a pediatric social worker. Her desk was cluttered with case files, each one representing a child navigating trauma, poverty, or family breakdown. It was work that drained her emotionally but felt necessary, meaningful in ways that Michael's world of investments and quarterly earnings never would. Her colleague, Sarah Okonkwo, knocked on the doorframe. "You look like you're trying to solve world hunger with that expression." Jessica smiled. "Just thinking about a wedding I have to attend." "Yours? I thought that wasn't until May." Michael's business partner. "It's complicated." Sarah sat across from her, cradling a coffee mug. "Complicated how?" Jessica explained the situation. Richard, Elena, the family drama. Sarah listened with the same careful attention she gave to their most difficult cases. "So the rich guy is marrying someone who had nothing, and his family hates it," Sarah summarized. classic tale as old as time. What's your read on the bride? I haven't met her yet. But you have an opinion. Sarah had known her long enough to read between the lines. Jessica hesitated. I guess I'm skeptical. 4 months is so fast. And Richard's world, Michael's world, it's ruthless. You don't survive in that environment by being naive or sentimental. What if Elena's not who she seems? What if she's exactly who she seems and that's what Richard fell for? Sarah countered. Sometimes people surprise you. Jessica nodded, but the unease remained. That evening, she tried to push her concerns aside as she and Michael discussed the wedding logistics. The gift, the travel arrangements, what she'd wear. But underneath the practical details, questions multiplied. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jessica received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up on the 4th ring. Is this Jessica Hartwell? The voice was female, young, with a slight accent Jessica couldn't place. Speaking. Who's this? A long pause. My name is Sofia Martinez. Elena Martinez is my sister. Jessica sat up straighter at her desk. Oh, hello. I'm looking forward to meeting Elena at the wedding. That's why I'm calling. Sofia's voice dropped lower. I need to talk to you before the wedding. In person. It's about Richard Chen. Jessica's pulse quickened. What about him? Not over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon? There's a coffee shop in Cambridge near MIT, the Voltage Cafe on Mass Ave. Every instinct told Jessica to refuse, to tell Michael about the call, to stay out of whatever this was. But Sofia's urgency was palpable, even through the phone line. Why me? Jessica asked. Because you're not part of their world yet. You're not fully invested in protecting Richard. And because if I'm right about what I think is happening, you deserve to know before you tie your life to Michael's even more permanently. The implication hung in the air. Jessica's engagement ring suddenly felt heavy on her finger. 2 o'clock tomorrow, Sofia said. Please, my sister doesn't know I'm calling you, but someone needs to know the truth. The line went dead before Jessica could respond. The Voltage Cafe smelled of espresso and old textbooks, filled with students hunched over laptops and scattered groups, debating in low voices. Jessica arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a table in the back corner where they'd have privacy. Rain streaked the windows, turning Cambridge into a blur of grey buildings and yellow umbrellas. Sofia Martinez arrived exactly at 2 o'clock. She was younger than Jessica expected, maybe 25, with Elena's same dark eyes but a harder edge to her features. She wore a burgundy jacket over a simple black dress, and her hands trembled slightly as she ordered a tea at the counter before joining Jessica. Thank you for coming, Sofia said, sitting down. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Jessica wrapped her hands around her own coffee cup. What's this about? Sofia glanced around the cafe, then leaned forward. How much do you know about Richard Chen's business? He runs an investment firm with my fiancé. They manage portfolios for high-net-worth clients. It's legitimate work. On the surface. Sofia pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. Did Michael ever mention the Morales family? Jessica shook her head. The name meant nothing to her. Victor Morales runs one of the most powerful criminal organizations on the East Coast. Drug trafficking, money laundering, extortion. He's been operating out of Lawrence for 15 years, but the feds can't touch him because his operation is so well insulated. Sofia's voice was steady, but intense. Richard Chen launders money for the Morales cartel through his investment firm. Jessica felt her stomach drop. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? My sister was Victor Morales' accountant for 3 years. That's how she ended up homeless. She discovered the connection between Morales and Richard, and when she tried to leave the organization quietly, they destroyed her life, froze her accounts, got her fired from her legitimate job, spread rumors that made her unemployable. They wanted to make sure she couldn't talk. If that's true, why isn't she going to the police? Sofia's laugh was bitter. Because Morales has connections everywhere. Police, judges, prosecutors. Elena tried to report what she knew 2 years ago, and the detective she spoke to was on Morales' payroll. She got a visit from 2 men who made it very clear what would happen if she talked again. That's when she ended up on the streets, too scared to even use her real name at the shelter. Jessica's mind raced. So how did Richard end up proposing to her? That's the twisted part. Sofia's hands tightened around her cup. Richard recognized Eleanor from when she worked for Morales. He knew exactly who she was when he approached her at the shelter. The whole charity work story, the whirlwind romance. It's all theater. He's marrying her to keep her close, to make sure she stays silent. As his wife, she can't be compelled to testify against him. The logic was cold, calculated, exactly the kind of strategic thinking Jessica had seen Michael employ in business. But this wasn't business. This was criminal conspiracy. "Why are you telling me this?" Jessica asked. "What do you expect me to do? Stop the wedding?" Sophia's eyes were desperate. "Elena won't listen to me. She's convinced herself that Richard really loves her, that he's protecting her from Morales rather than protecting himself. She thinks the wedding is her escape, but it's really a cage. If she marries him, she'll be trapped in this world forever." Jessica sat back, processing. "Even if everything you're saying is true, I can't just show up and accuse Richard of being a criminal without evidence. And if your sister won't talk, I have evidence." Sophia pulled a flash drive from her pocket, setting it on the table between them. Bank records, emails, transaction histories. Elena made copies before she left Morales' organization. She gave them to me for safekeeping, made me promise never to use them unless she was in immediate danger. "But Jessica, this wedding, it is danger. She just can't see it." Jessica stared at the flash drive. Everything in her wanted to leave it there, to walk out and pretend this conversation never happened. But she thought about Michael, about the life they were building together, about whether he knew what Richard was involved in. "Does Michael know about the money laundering?" she asked quietly. Sophia shook her head. "I don't think so. From what Elena told me, Richard keeps the illegal side separate. Michael handles the legitimate investment portfolios, but the two sides overlap just enough that if Richard goes down, Michael goes down with him. The firm's finances are too interconnected." That was what Jessica had feared. She took the flash drive, slipping it into her purse. "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked. "I don't know yet, but I need to verify this information before I make any accusations." "If you're wrong—" "I'm not wrong." Sophia's voice cracked. "My sister is the kindest person I know. She spent years helping people file their taxes for free, volunteering at food banks, tutoring kids in math. Morales used her goodness against her, and now Richard's doing the same thing. Someone has to stop this." They parted ways outside the cafe. Jessica walked through the rain toward the nearest tea station, her mind churning. She had 1 week before the wedding. 1 week to decide whether to trust a stranger's accusations or to trust the man she'd agreed to marry. That night, Michael was late coming home again. Jessica sat at her laptop in the study, the flash drive inserted, scrolling through files that made her blood run cold. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations with Richard's name buried in the ownership documents, transfers that corresponded with dates Sophia had mentioned, but it was the emails that sealed it. Conversations between Richard and someone identified only as VM, discussing product movement and distribution schedules. The language was coded, but the implications were clear. Jessica heard the front door open. She quickly ejected the flash drive and closed the laptop as Michael called out her name. "In here," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. He appeared in the doorway, looking even more exhausted than usual. "Sorry I'm late. Richard's having a meltdown about the wedding arrangements. His mother refuses to come if Elena's family is invited." "What did you tell him?" Jessica asked carefully. "To do what makes him happy. Life's too short to live according to someone else's expectations." He crossed to her, kissing the top of her head. "You okay? You seem tense." Jessica turned to face him. "Can I ask you something about the firm?" "Of course. Do you know all of Richard's clients?" Michael's expression shifted slightly. "Why?" "I'm just curious about how the business works. You never really talk about it." He sat on the edge of the desk. "I handle about 60% of the client relationships. Richard manages the rest personally. Some of them prefer more privacy, especially the international accounts. It's not unusual in our industry." "But you trust him," Jessica said. "With my life." Michael didn't hesitate. "Richard gave me a shot when no other firm would touch me. I was a kid from a working-class family, trying to break into a world that didn't want me. He saw potential where everyone else saw a liability." "Why are you asking?" Jessica wanted to tell him everything. About Sophia, the flash drive, the accusations, but something held her back. If Michael was truly ignorant of Richard's criminal activities, learning the truth would destroy him. And if he wasn't ignorant, if he knew and had hidden it from her, then their entire relationship was built on lies. "Just wedding stress," she said finally. "Ignore me." But Michael studied her face. and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the same look he got when he was analyzing a complex problem. You've been different the last few days. Distant. If something's wrong, I need to know. Nothing's wrong, Jessica lied. I promise. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. That night, Jessica lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing even out into sleep. She thought about Sophia's desperate plea, about Elena walking unknowingly into a trap, about the choice she faced. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would go to the wedding. She would watch, listen, gather more information. And if she confirmed that Sophia was right, she would find a way to stop it, even if it meant destroying everything she and Michael had built together. The truth mattered more than comfort. It always had. Jessica spent the following days moving through her routine with mechanical precision, all while her mind worked overtime, analyzing every interaction with Michael, every casual mention of Richard or the firm. She was looking for cracks in the facade, inconsistencies that would either confirm or disprove Sophia's claims. On Thursday evening, she met Sarah for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. The narrow streets were packed with tourists and locals, the smell of garlic and fresh bread filling the crisp autumn air. "You've been quiet lately," Sarah said once they'd ordered. "Michael okay?" "Michael's fine. It's everything else that's complicated." Jessica took a deep breath. "If you found out someone you loved was connected to something illegal, would you tell them? Or would you investigate first?" Sarah set down her wineglass. "This is about Richard Chen's wedding." Jessica nodded, then explained everything. Sophia's accusations, the flash drive, the evidence she'd reviewed. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "This is dangerous territory," Sarah said finally. "If these accusations are true and you start asking questions, you could become a target. The kind of people who launder cartel money don't appreciate curiosity." "I know, but I can't just ignore it. Elena's walking into a trap, and Michael could be implicated even if he's innocent. I need to know the truth." "What does your gut tell you?" Sarah asked. "About Michael? Do you think he knows?" Jessica had been asking herself the same question. "I want to believe he doesn't, but he's so loyal to Richard, almost blindly so, and some of his comments about the firm's international clients, the way he deflects when I ask too many questions, it makes me wonder if he's willfully ignorant, choosing not to see what's in front of him because acknowledging it would mean making impossible choices. And if he does know, then I don't know who I'm engaged to." Jessica's voice broke slightly. "We've been together 2 years, Sarah. We've talked about having kids, building a life together. How could he hide something like this from me?" Sarah reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "People compartmentalize. They tell themselves stories about why the rules don't apply to them, why their situation is different. Michael grew up poor, right? Maybe he justified whatever Richard was doing because it gave him a chance at the life he always wanted." It was a generous interpretation, but Jessica knew Sarah was probably right. People were capable of extraordinary mental gymnastics when their self-interest was at stake. "I need to talk to Elena," Jessica said. "Before the wedding. Hear her side directly. Will she talk to you?" "I don't know, but I have to try." Jessica sent a message through the wedding website that evening, requesting Eleanor's phone number from Richard's assistant. To her surprise, Eleanor called her the next morning while Jessica was walking to work through the public garden. The swan boats were closed for the season, and fallen leaves covered the paths in sheets of red and gold. "Hi, Jessica. This is Elena Martinez. I got your message. Richard mentioned you and Michael would be coming to the wedding." Her voice was warm, genuinely friendly in a way that immediately complicated Jessica's mission. It was harder to see someone as a victim when they sounded so happy. "Thank you for calling back," Jessica said. "I know you must be incredibly busy with preparations. I was hoping we could meet for coffee before the wedding, get to know each other a bit since our partners work so closely together." There was a brief pause. "I'd love that. I don't know many people in Boston yet, and Richard's been so worried about me feeling isolated. Are you free this afternoon? There's a cafe near Richard's office in the financial district." They agreed to meet at 4 o'clock. Jessica spent the rest of the day rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd approach the topic without sounding accusatory or crazy. By the time she arrived at the sleek coffee shop with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, her nerves were frayed. Eleanor was already there, sitting at a corner table. She was beautiful in an understated way, dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a cream sweater that looked expensive but not ostentatious. When she smiled, it reached her eyes. "Jessica, thank you so much for suggesting this." Eleanor stood to hug her, which surprised Jessica. "I've been hoping to meet you properly. Richard speaks so highly of Michael, and by extension, of you." They ordered drinks and settled into conversation that started cautiously but gradually warmed. Elena asked about Jessica's work at the hospital, sharing stories about her own previous career as an accountant for non-profit organizations. She was articulate, thoughtful, clearly intelligent. "How did you end up at the shelter?" Jessica asked, trying to sound casual. Eleanor's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "It's a long story. I made some mistakes, trusted the wrong people professionally. Things fell apart pretty quickly after that. But you're okay now. Richard's taking care of you." "Richard saved me." Elena's voice was fervent. "I know how that sounds, like some fairy tale. But when you've been at the bottom, when you've felt completely invisible to the world, having someone see you, really see you, it changes everything. He could have anyone, but he chose me. Not despite my past, but including it." Jessica wanted to believe that narrative. It would be easier if Elena was simply a gold digger, or if Richard was straightforwardly villainous. But the reality was messier. "Your sister called me," Jessica said quietly. Elena's face went pale. "Sophia, what did she tell you?" "That you used to work for Victor Morales, that you have information about Richard's business connections, that the wedding is a way to silence you." For a long moment, Elena said nothing. Around them, the cafe buzzed with conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia doesn't understand. Yes, I worked for Morales. Yes, I saw things I shouldn't have seen. And yes, Richard knows about my past. But he's not trying to trap me. He's protecting me from Morales. The wedding gives me legal protections, connections, resources to fight back if Morales ever comes after me again. Or it keeps you quiet," Jessica said gently. "Spousal privilege means you can't be forced to testify against him." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You think I haven't thought about that? You think I don't lie awake at night wondering if I'm making a terrible mistake? But I love him, Jessica. And more than that, I need him. Without Richard, I'm just a homeless woman with dangerous knowledge and no protection. With him, I have a chance at a real life. Even if that life is built on lies." "Whose life isn't?" Elena's voice hardened. "You think Michael's firm is completely clean? You think any successful business in this city got that way without cutting corners, without knowing when to look the other way? We all make compromises, mine are just more obvious." Jessica felt the truth of that statement like a punch. How many times had she ignored her own doubts about Michael's work, because it was easier than confronting uncomfortable realities? "I'm not going to stop the wedding," Elena continued. "I'm not going to run away or go to the authorities or do any of the things Sophia thinks I should do. I'm going to marry Richard, and I'm going to build the best life I can with the choices I have. If you came here to talk me out of it, you've wasted your time." She stood, gathering her purse. "I hope you and Michael still come to the wedding. Despite everything, I meant what I said about wanting to be friends. We're going to be in each other's lives for a long time." Eleanor left, and Jessica sat alone at the table, watching the harbor ferries cut through the grey water. She'd hoped the conversation would provide clarity, but instead, it had only deepened her uncertainty. Elena wasn't naive. She knew exactly what she was walking into, and she'd chosen it with open eyes. That made everything more complicated. Jessica couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved, but she could still decide whether to protect herself and Michael from the inevitable fallout. That evening, Jessica called Sophia from her car, parked in an underground garage where no one could overhear. "I talked to Elena," Jessica said. "She's not going to back out. She knows what Richard is, and she's choosing him anyway." Sophia's response was immediate and anguished. "Then we have to go public with the evidence. Give it to the FBI, let them shut down Richard's operation before the wedding. That would destroy Michael, too. The firm would be investigated, all their assets frozen. Even if he's innocent, the association alone would ruin him. So you're just going to let it happen? Let your fiancé tie himself to a criminal operation because you're too scared of the consequences?" Jessica closed her eyes. "I don't know what I'm going to do. But I need more time to think." "We don't have time," Sophia's voice cracked. "The wedding is in 3 days. Once they're married, Elena will be completely under Richard's control. Legal, financial, emotional, all of it. She'll never get free." Maybe that's her choice to make, Jessica said quietly. The silence that followed was thick with Sophia's disappointment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. I hope you can live with yourself, Jessica. I hope when this all falls apart, and it will, you remember that you had a chance to stop it. The line went dead. Jessica sat in her car for another 20 minutes, weighing her options. She could give the evidence to the authorities and watch Michael's world collapse. She could confront Michael directly and risk him choosing Richard over her. She could go to the wedding and say nothing, becoming complicit through her silence. Or she could do what Elena suggested, accept that everyone makes compromises, that perfect morality is a luxury few can afford, and that sometimes survival matters more than righteousness. By the time she drove home, she still hadn't decided, but she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever choice she made at that wedding would define the rest of her life. The night before the wedding, the rehearsal dinner was held at a private dining room in Mistral, an upscale restaurant in Boston's South End. Jessica and Michael arrived fashionably late, caught in traffic on Storrow Drive as Friday evening commuters fled the city. The dining room was elegant, but not ostentatious. Exposed brick walls, candlelight reflecting off polished wood tables, fresh flowers in simple arrangements. About 30 people mingled with champagne glasses, their conversations creating a pleasant murmur. Richard stood near the bar with Elena, his arm around her waist, both of them radiating the specific glow of pre-wedding excitement. There they are, Richard called out, waving Michael over. The best man finally arrives. Jessica hadn't known Michael was serving as best man. It was another small detail he'd failed to mention, another reminder of how much of his life with Richard remained opaque to her. They made their way through the crowd. Richard embraced Michael warmly, then turned to Jessica with a broad smile. And the beautiful Jessica. Eleanor's been looking forward to seeing you again. Eleanor stepped forward, kissing Jessica's cheek. If she held any resentment about their previous conversation, she hid it perfectly. I'm so glad you came. Let me introduce you to some people. As Eleanor led her away toward a group of women near the windows, Jessica caught Michael's eye. He looked happy, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in weeks. This was his element, the intersection of business and social capital, where relationships were both genuine and strategic. The women Elena introduced were a mix of Richard's relatives and a few friends Elena had apparently maintained despite her recent hardships. They were friendly, but clearly sizing Jessica up, wondering about her place in this world. She recognized the dynamic from her own childhood in a middle-class suburb of Worcester, the subtle ways people assessed whether you belonged. How long have you and Michael been together? One woman asked, a cousin of Richard's named Patricia, who wore pearls and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 2 years. We got engaged last spring. And what do you do? I'm a social worker. Pediatrics. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. In this crowd, Jessica's profession was exotic, vaguely noble but also confirming that she wasn't truly one of them. She didn't work in finance or law or medicine. She worked with poor children, which was admirable in the abstract but uncomfortable in specifics. That must be fulfilling, Patricia said, the pause deliberate. Elena rescued her. Jessica works at Children's Hospital. She told me about some of her cases when we had coffee. The work she does is incredible. They moved on to lighter topics, wedding details, honeymoon plans, the unseasonably warm weather, but Jessica felt constantly observed, evaluated. She wondered if Richard's family was doing the same thing to Eleanor, trying to identify the flaws that explained why she wasn't suitable. Dinner was served at 8. Braised short ribs, roasted vegetables, artisanal bread. Jessica found herself seated between Michael and one of Richard's college friends, a hedge fund manager named David, who spent most of the meal discussing cryptocurrency trends that Jessica barely understood. Across the table, Richard's father, William Chen, presided over his end with the quiet authority of inherited wealth. He was in his late 60s, distinguished in the way that expensive tailoring and regular exercise could achieve. He barely acknowledged Elena throughout the meal, directing most of his comments to Richard in Mandarin, which Elena clearly didn't understand. He's being deliberately rude, Michael whispered to Jessica during a lull in conversation, trying to make her feel unwelcome. Is he always like this? Worse, actually. This is him being polite for the sake of appearances. Michael took a long drink of wine. Richard's made his choice, though. His father will either accept it or lose his son. That's the calculus. Jessica wondered if Michael would make the same choice if forced. If she asked him to choose between her and Richard, between love and loyalty to the man who'd made his career possible, which would he pick? After dinner, Richard stood to offer a toast. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. He looked confident, happy, younger than his 37 years. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "Most of you know I'm not great with emotional speeches. I prefer numbers and contracts, things that can be quantified and analyzed. But Elena has taught me that some things can't be reduced to data points." He looked down at her, and Jessica saw genuine affection in his expression. Whatever his motivations, whatever compromises he'd made, he did care about Elena. That made everything more complicated. "When I met Elena 4 months ago, I was at a charity event that I honestly didn't want to attend. It was good for the company's image, so I showed up and smiled for the cameras. But then I saw her volunteering at the food distribution, and something about the way she interacted with people, really listened to them, made them feel seen. It stopped me cold." Several people murmured appreciatively. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm not going to pretend our path here has been conventional," Richard continued. "My family has concerns. Some of my friends have questions. But I've learned that conventional paths often lead to conventional lives, and I want more than that. I want the extraordinary. I want Elena." He raised his glass. "To love that surprises us, to choices that terrify us, to building something real in a world that often feels fake. To love." The room echoed, glasses clinking. Michael stood next, offering his own toast as best man. He spoke about Richard's loyalty, his generosity, the way he'd believed in Michael when no one else had. Jessica watched him speak and saw the version of her fiancé that existed in this world, polished, confident, belonging in a way he never quite did anywhere else. The evening continued with more toasts, more wine, more laughter. Around 10 o'clock, Jessica excused herself to use the restroom. The facilities were down a narrow hallway, lined with black and white photographs of Boston landmarks. She was washing her hands when Sophia appeared beside her. Jessica startled. "What are you doing here?" "I wasn't invited, obviously, but I needed to see my sister make one last attempt to talk sense into her." Sophia looked exhausted, desperate. "She won't take my calls. She's blocked my number. This is my only chance. Sophia, you can't just show up. I know what you think of me, that I'm being dramatic, that I'm jealous of Elena's happiness, that I don't understand her choices. But I'm her sister. I know her in ways Richard never will. And I'm telling you, this is wrong." Before Jessica could respond, Eleanor pushed through the restroom door. She froze when she saw Sophia. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Absolutely not. You need to leave. Eleanor, please, just listen." "I've listened. For months I've listened to you tell me I'm making a mistake, that Richard's using me, that I'm too damaged to see clearly. I'm done listening." Eleanor's voice shook with anger and hurt. "I am happy. For the first time in years I have hope for the future. Why can't you be happy for me?" "Because it's built on lies." Sophia stepped closer. "Richard doesn't love you. He's protecting himself. Once you're married, he owns you. Legally, financially." Eleanor slapped her. The sound cracked through the small bathroom like a gunshot. Sophia touched her reddening cheek, tears streaming down her face. "Get out," Eleanor said quietly. "Get out, and don't come back. If you show up at the wedding tomorrow, I'll have security remove you. You're not my sister anymore. My sister would want me to be happy." Sophia looked at Jessica, a final desperate plea in her eyes. Then she fled. Eleanor turned to Jessica, composing herself with visible effort. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Family dynamics can be complicated." "Eleanor, please don't." Eleanor held up a hand. "I know Sophia's talked to you. I know she's given you all sorts of information and made all kinds of accusations. But you have to understand, Sophia has never recovered from our parents' deaths. She sees conspiracy and danger everywhere. She can't accept that good things can happen, that people can change circumstances." "What if she's right?" Jessica asked gently. "What if you're walking into something you can't get out of?" Eleanor met her eyes. "Then it will be my mistake to make. Not Sophia's, not yours, mine." She left, and Jessica stood alone in the restroom, processing what she'd witnessed. The desperation in Sophia's eyes, the pain in Elena's voice, the fundamental question of whether protecting someone against their will was love or control. When Jessica returned to the dining room, Michael was deep in conversation with Richard near the bar. As she approached, She caught the tail end of their discussion. "Transfer should clear by Monday," Richard was saying. "The offshore accounts are completely clean. Even if someone looks, they won't find anything that connects back to us." Michael noticed Jessica and immediately changed the subject, smiling too brightly. "Hey, there you are. We were just talking about the honeymoon plans." But Jessica had heard enough. The offshore accounts, the careful separation of financial connections. Michael knew. Maybe not all the details, maybe not the full extent of Richard's operations, but he knew enough to help hide it. Her fiancé wasn't innocent. He was complicit. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jessica smiled and made small talk and pretended her world wasn't fracturing. When they finally left around midnight, Michael was slightly drunk, happy in the uncomplicated way that came from successful social performance. "That went well," he said, as they drove home through empty streets. "Richard's dad was still an ass, but everyone else seemed genuinely happy for them. I think this will work out." Even with all the family drama, Jessica kept her voice neutral. "Every family has drama. It's how you push through it that matters." He reached over, squeezing her hand. "We're lucky. Our families get along, no complicated histories to navigate. It'll be smooth sailing for us." Jessica said nothing. She stared out the window at the city lights and thought about all the ways people convinced themselves that lies were truths, that compromises were necessities, that the ends justified any means. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether to speak or stay silent, whether to protect Elena from her own choices or respect her agency, whether to save Michael from consequences he probably deserved or preserve a relationship built partially on willful blindness. The truth was a weapon, and Jessica was about to decide where to aim it. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of October day that felt stolen from summer. Jessica woke at 6, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. Michael was still passed out beside her, one arm flung over his face, snoring softly. She showered and dressed mechanically, putting on the navy silk dress she'd bought for the occasion. It was elegant but understated, appropriate for a daytime wedding at a yacht club. She applied makeup carefully, using it like armor, foundation to hide the circles under her eyes, lipstick to give the illusion of composure. By the time Michael woke at 8, Jessica had already made coffee, reviewed the flash drive files one more time, and steeled herself for what was coming. "Big day," Michael said, kissing her cheek as he poured his own coffee. "You look beautiful. That dress is perfect." "Thank you." Jessica watched him move around the kitchen, comfortable and relaxed. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Last night at the bar, you and Richard were talking about offshore accounts. What was that about?" Michael's hand stilled on his coffee mug. "Just business stuff, nothing important." "It sounded important." He turned to face her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. "Why are you asking?" "Because I need to know if you're aware of everything Richard does. Professionally, I mean. Jess, we've been over this. I handle my clients, Richard handles his. The firm is structured that way for legal reasons. If something goes wrong with one side, it doesn't automatically contaminate the other." "That's not an answer." Michael set down his mug harder than necessary. "What do you want me to say? That I've asked Richard every detail about every transaction he makes? That I've audited his work to make sure it meets your moral standards? I trust him. That's how partnerships work, even if that trust makes you complicit in illegal activity." The silence that followed was glacial. Michael's expression went from defensive to cold. "I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making," he said quietly. "Based on what?" "Something Sofia Martinez told you. A woman who's clearly unstable and has every reason to sabotage her sister's wedding? Based on financial records, emails, transaction histories that show Richard laundering money for a criminal organization." Michael's face went pale. "Where did you get that information?" "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is whether it's true." "And you believed it? Just like that? Without talking to me first, without considering that maybe there's context you're missing?" His voice rose. "Jesus, Jessica. I thought you knew me better than that." "I thought I did too." Jessica felt tears threatening but forced them back. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me that Richard's completely legitimate and that Sophia fabricated everything. Give me a reason to believe you." Michael ran his hands through his hair, pacing the kitchen. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. "Richard operates in gray areas sometimes. International finance is complicated. There are tax strategies and offshore structures that look suspicious to outsiders, but are completely legal. Is it possible some of his clients have questionable backgrounds? Maybe, but that doesn't make him a criminal. Banks don't refuse to serve people just because they have connections to bad actors. We're not law enforcement. We're not responsible for investigating every client's history. It was a careful answer, technically true but morally evasive. Jessica recognized the logic. It was the same reasoning that allowed cigarette companies to claim they weren't responsible for lung cancer, that allowed weapons manufacturers to deny accountability for mass shootings. We just provide a service. What people do with it isn't our concern. Do you know Victor Morales? Jessica asked. Michael's hesitation told her everything. I've heard the name. Richard mentioned him as one of his international clients, but I've never met him, never handled any of his accounts. He's a cartel boss, Michael. He traffics drugs and orders executions and destroys lives, and Richard helps him hide his money, which means the firm, your firm, is built partially on blood money. You don't know that for certain. I know enough. Jessica grabbed her purse. We're still going to the wedding, but afterward, we need to have a serious conversation about our future, because I can't marry someone who's willing to look away from evil for the sake of a comfortable life. And I can't marry someone who doesn't trust me, Michael shot back, who believes the worst about me based on hearsay and stolen documents. They drove to the wedding in tense silence, the 30-minute trip to Manchester by the Sea feeling endless. The Essex Harbour Yacht Club was exactly as exclusive as Jessica had imagined, a sprawling white building on the water, with perfectly manicured lawns and a private beach where sailboats bobbed at their moorings. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 o'clock on the south lawn overlooking the harbour. Guests were already arriving, dressed in elegant cocktail attire, laughing and embracing under the bright sun. A string quartet played near the flower-draped archway, where Richard and Elena would exchange vows. Jessica and Michael were shown to seats in the third row. Michael immediately stood to greet other guests, falling into the social rhythms that came naturally to him. Jessica sat alone watching the scene unfold like a play she couldn't stop. Sophia's words echoed in her mind. Once they're married, Elena will be trapped. This is your last chance to stop it. But was it her place to stop it? Elena had made her choice with full knowledge of the risks. Who was Jessica to override that choice, to decide that Elena was too damaged or desperate to know her own mind? At 1:45, the music changed. The guests took their seats as the wedding party processed down the aisle. Bridesmaids in sage-green dresses, groomsmen in charcoal suits. Michael took his place at the front as best man, standing beside Richard, who looked nervous and excited. Then the music swelled and Elena appeared. She wore a simple white dress, elegant rather than elaborate, with her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a bouquet of white roses and looked radiantly happy. There was no father to walk her down the aisle. Jessica remembered that her parents had died years ago, so she walked alone, steady and certain. Jessica watched Richard's face as Elena approached. Whatever else was true, he did love her. It might be a selfish love, a protective love that served his own interests, but it was real. Jessica could see it in the way he looked at her, the vulnerability in his expression. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about love and commitment, about choosing each other every day despite uncertainty and fear. Jessica barely heard the words. She was too focused on the moment approaching, when the officiant would ask if anyone objected to the union, if anyone had reason why these two should not be married. She had the flash drive in her purse. She had evidence of criminal activity. She had every reason to object. Michael caught her eye from the front row. His expression was pleading, desperate. "Don't," it said. "Please don't do this." "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be lawfully joined," the officiant said, "speak now or forever hold your peace." Jessica's heart hammered. This was the moment. Stand up and everything changes. Richard gets exposed. Michael's career ends. Elena's protection evaporates. The comfortable fiction everyone has been maintaining shatters, or stays silent and become complicit, except that the world runs on compromises and moral ambiguity. Choose comfort over righteousness. She opened her mouth and closed it again. She sat in silence as the moment passed, as the officiant smiled and continued, as Richard and Elena exchanged vows and rings and promises. She watched them kiss to enthusiastic applause, watched them walk back down the aisle as husband and wife, watched Michael's visible relief. The choice was made. Jessica had chosen silence. The reception was held in the yacht club's grand ballroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbour. Round tables with white linens held floral centerpieces of roses and hydrangeas. A jazz band played near the dance floor. It was beautiful and elegant and hollow. Jessica moved through the cocktail hour in a daze, sipping champagne she didn't taste, making conversation she didn't hear. Michael stayed close to her, his hand frequently on her lower back, as if physical proximity could repair what had broken between them that morning. "Thank you," he whispered during a quiet moment. "I know that was hard, but you made the right choice." Had she? Jessica wasn't sure anymore. She felt unmoored, disconnected from her own certainty. Dinner was served at 6, filet mignon and Chilean sea bass, paired wines, elaborate desserts. The speeches began around 7:30. Michael's best man toast was polished and heartfelt, speaking about loyalty and second chances, about how Richard and Elena had both overcome obstacles to find each other. "To the happy couple," Michael concluded, raising his glass. "May they build something lasting." Jessica applauded with everyone else, the sound hollow in her ears. Then Elena's friend Maria stood to offer a maid of honor toast. She was nervous, stumbling slightly over her words, but her affection for Elena was obvious. She talked about Elena's kindness, her resilience, how she'd maintained hope even during the darkest times. "Elena once told me that the hardest thing about being homeless wasn't the cold or the hunger," Maria said. "It was feeling invisible, like you'd stopped mattering to the world. But Richard saw her. He made her feel human again. Whatever else happens, that gift of being seen, it's everything." The applause was more subdued, some guests uncomfortable with the reference to Elena's past, but Jessica felt the words like a punch. Being seen. Wasn't that what everyone wanted? To be recognized, valued, considered worth saving? After the toasts, dancing began. Richard and Elena took the floor for their first dance to Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight." They moved together naturally, Elena laughing at something Richard whispered in her ear. Michael asked Jessica to dance. She let him lead her onto the floor, his arms around her waist, her hands on his shoulders. They moved without speaking, the distance between them measured in more than inches. "We'll get through this," Michael said finally. "Once the shock wears off, once you've had time to process everything, you'll see that it's not as black and white as you think." "Isn't it?" Jessica asked. "Nothing is. We're all just doing our best with imperfect information and competing priorities. Richard isn't a monster. He's a man trying to survive in a complicated world by helping actual monsters survive." Michael's jaw tightened. "By providing financial services that happen to have morally ambiguous clients. There's a difference. Is there? When the end result is the same, people getting hurt while Richard and his clients profit." They stopped dancing, standing still while couples moved around them. Michael's expression was a mix of frustration and sadness. "I can't make you understand if you've already decided I'm the villain," he said. "But I love you, Jessica. That hasn't changed. Whatever you think about Richard or the firm or my choices, that's still true." "I know," Jessica said quietly, "but I don't know if that's enough anymore." The reception continued into the evening, the energy shifting from formal elegance to relaxed celebration as alcohol flowed and inhibitions loosened. Jessica excused herself around 9 o'clock, needing air and distance from the performance everyone was maintaining. She walked out onto the yacht club's deck, where a few smokers huddled against the October chill. The harbor stretched dark before her, boats rocking gently at their moorings, their masts silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The music from inside was muffled but constant, a reminder that the celebration continued with or without her participation. "Beautiful night," a voice said beside her. Jessica turned to find William Chen, Richard's father, standing a few feet away. He held a scotch and regarded her with an expression that was difficult to read, not unfriendly but assessing. "It is," Jessica agreed cautiously. "You're Michael's fiancée, Jessica, correct?" "Yes, sir." William smiled slightly. "No need for formality. We're practically family now, aren't we? Our sons, at least Richard and his chosen brother Michael, have bound themselves together, and now with this wedding, the connections only deepen." There was something in his tone that suggested layers beneath the polite words. Jessica waited for him to continue. "I want you to understand something," William said, moving closer to the railing. "I built my company over 40 years, started with nothing but a graduate degree and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. I made sacrifices. My wife made sacrifices. We gave Richard every opportunity, every advantage. That's admirable. And now he's throwing it away for a woman who brings nothing but complications." William's voice hardened. Elena Martinez is not who Richard believes she is. She's a liability, a connection to people who will eventually destroy everything we've built. Jessica's pulse quickened. What do you mean? William turned to face her directly. I know what my son does. I know about the offshore accounts, the questionable clients, the ways he's expanded the firm's services beyond what I ever intended. I'm not naive, but I'm also pragmatic. In international finance, you sometimes serve clients whose money is less than clean. That's the reality of staying competitive. That's called money laundering, Jessica said quietly. That's called business. William took a long sip of his scotch. But there are rules, there are lines you don't cross. Richard understands that. He knows how to keep operations compartmentalized, how to maintain plausible deniability, how to protect the legitimate side of the firm from contamination. So you do know about Victor Morales? William's eyes narrowed. I know that name came up in some of Richard's reports. I know he represents significant capital. Beyond that, I don't ask questions I don't want answered. But Eleanor, she knows too much. She worked directly for Morales, saw the entire operation from the inside. If she ever decides to cooperate with authorities, she could destroy not just Richard's criminal clients, but the entire firm, including the legitimate business that supports dozens of families. Jessica felt cold despite the warm evening. So what are you saying? That Richard shouldn't have married her? I'm saying he already did, and now we all have to live with the consequences. William's voice dropped lower. But you still have a choice. Michael is a good man, but he's loyal to a fault. That loyalty will drag him down when this inevitably collapses. You can walk away now. End the engagement. Protect yourself before you're legally and financially tied to the wreckage. You're telling me to leave Michael? I'm telling you to be smart. William finished his scotch. Elena made her choice. Michael is making his. But you haven't committed yet. That ring on your finger. It's not a marriage certificate. You still have options. He walked back inside, leaving Jessica alone with her thoughts and the sound of water lapping against the dock. She stood there for another 10 minutes, processing William's warning. He was right about one thing. She did still have a choice. But leaving Michael meant abandoning him to consequences that would devastate him. Staying meant accepting complicity in a system she found morally repugnant. When she returned to the ballroom, the party was in full swing. Eleanor and Richard were on the dance floor surrounded by friends, everyone laughing and swaying to a Motown song. Michael was at the bar, talking animatedly with David, the hedge fund manager from the rehearsal dinner. Jessica watched them all, these people who had learned to compartmentalize morality, to separate their professional choices from their personal identities, to convince themselves that survival in a corrupt system didn't make them corrupt themselves. She made her way to the women's restroom, needing a moment alone. Inside, she splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection. Who was she? The righteous crusader who would burn everything down for truth? Or the pragmatist who understood that purity was a luxury and that real life demanded compromise? The door opened, and Elena walked in. For a moment, they just looked at each other. I saw you talking to Richard's father, Elena said finally. What did he say? That I should leave Michael before everything collapses. Eleanor moved to the mirror, checking her makeup. He told me the same thing when Richard first proposed. Said I was a mistake that would ruin his son's life. But here we are. Are you happy? Jessica asked. Truly happy? Or just relieved to have security? Elena met her eyes in the mirror. Can't it be both? Why does happiness have to be pure to count? I'm safe now. I have resources. I have someone who wants to protect me, even if his reasons are partially selfish. That's more than I had 6 months ago. But at what cost? At the cost of my illusions. Eleanor turned to face her directly. I used to believe the world was fair, that good people got rewarded and bad people got punished. Working for Morales destroyed that belief. Now I understand that the world is just power and survival. Richard has power. Staying with him keeps me alive. That's the calculation. And love? Jessica asked. Where does that fit? Love is the story we tell ourselves to make the calculation bearable. Eleanor's smile was sad. But the story matters, Jessica. Even if it's partially fiction, it gives us a reason to keep going. Richard needs to believe he's my hero. I need to believe this marriage is more than just strategic alliance. We're both lying to ourselves a little bit, but those lies might be what save us. She left, and Jessica remained in the bathroom. Elena's words echoing. Those lies might be what save us. Was that wisdom or capitulation? Survival or surrender? When Jessica emerged, she found Michael waiting for her in the hallway. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice urgent, "before you hear it from someone else." They walked to an empty corner of the deck. The temperature had dropped, and Jessica shivered in her thin dress. Michael offered his jacket, but she shook her head. "I knew," Michael said, "about Richard's clients, about the money laundering. I've known for about a year. Not all the details, not the full extent, but enough to understand what was happening." Jessica felt the confirmation like a physical blow, even though she'd suspected. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I didn't know how to explain why I stayed. Because I kept telling myself I could change things from the inside, that I could steer Richard toward more legitimate operations." He ran his hands through his hair. "But the truth is, I liked the money. I liked the lifestyle, the respect, the security. I grew up poor, Jess. Really poor. Welfare poor. Wondering if we'd have electricity poor. And Richard offered me a way out. A way to never feel that fear again. So you sold your integrity for comfort?" "Yes." His voice broke. "I did. And I've been lying to myself about it ever since. Telling myself it wasn't that bad. That I wasn't really involved. That I could keep my hands clean by just focusing on my own clients. But I was involved. Every partnership distribution I accepted. Every year-end bonus, every benefit from the firm's success. It was all tainted by where the money came from." Jessica felt tears on her cheeks. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because William's right. This is going to collapse eventually. Morales will get caught, or Elena will break, or the feds will connect the dots, and when it does, I'll go down with Richard. I've accepted that. But I need you to know the truth before you decide whether to stay with me. You deserve to make that choice with full information." They stood in silence, the party continuing inside, the world moving forward while theirs stood still. "I love you," Michael said. "I know that doesn't change what I've done or make it acceptable, but it's true. I love you, and I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was." Jessica looked at him, this man she'd planned to marry, to build a life with, to trust completely. He was flawed and compromised, and had made terrible choices, but he was also human, shaped by fears and ambitions that she could understand, even if she couldn't excuse them. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to figure out what I can live with. I can't give you an answer tonight." Michael nodded, accepting that. They went back inside together, but separately, each lost in their own thoughts. The party wound down around 11. Richard and Elena, left in a shower of birdseed and well wishes, headed to a hotel in Boston before flying to Italy for their honeymoon the next day. Guests dispersed to their cars, tired and happy, already forgetting the celebration as they returned to their own lives. Jessica and Michael drove home in silence. When they arrived at their brownstone, Michael went straight to the study, giving her space. Jessica sat in the darkened living room, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Did you stop it?" Jessica typed back, "No, I stayed silent." The response came immediately. "Then you're as guilty as the rest of them." Jessica set the phone down. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe silence was complicity. Maybe by choosing not to act, Jessica had made herself part of the system she claimed to oppose. Or maybe she'd simply recognized that the world was more complicated than her younger self had believed, that righteousness was easier when the costs were abstract, that everyone compromised when their own security was at stake. She sat there until dawn, watching the sky lighten over Boston, trying to decide who she was and who she wanted to become. The answers didn't come, but by morning she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever she decided about Michael, about their future, about her own complicity, she would have to live with that choice for the rest of her life. And unlike Eleanor's wedding vows, there would be no applause to validate it. Monday morning arrived with cold rain, the kind that turned Boston streets into rivers of grey slush and made the commute miserable. Jessica called in sick to work. The first time in 3 years she'd used a personal day for anything other than actual illness. She needed time to think, to process, to figure out what came next. Michael had already left for the office by the time she woke at 9. He'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "I understand if you need space, I'll stay at David's tonight. I love you." Jessica made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open to the flash drive files she'd reviewed so many times she'd memorized them. Bank statements showing transfers from accounts linked to Morales. Emails discussing shipments and distributions in obvious code. The paper trail that connected Richard Chen to a criminal empire. She had power now. The question was, what to do with it? Her phone rang. An unknown number. Jessica almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Jessica Hartwell? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Agent Marcus Rodriguez. I'm with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about Richard Chen and Chen & Associates. Are you available to meet today? Jessica's heart stopped. How did you get my number? Sophia Martinez provided it. She contacted our office this morning with allegations of money laundering and suggested you might have supporting evidence. Ms. Hartwell, I need to be clear. If you have information about criminal activity and you've been withholding it, that could constitute obstruction. But if you cooperate fully now, we can work with you. The walls felt like they were closing in. I need to speak with a lawyer. That's your right, but I'm offering you a chance to get ahead of this. Once we start officially investigating the firm, anyone associated with it becomes a person of interest. That includes your fiancé. If you want to protect him, the best thing you can do is cooperate with us now. Jessica closed her eyes. Where do you want to meet? They arranged to meet at 2 o'clock at a coffee shop in Cambridge, neutral territory. After hanging up, Jessica sat motionless for 10 minutes, her mind racing through scenarios and consequences. If she gave the FBI the files, Richard would be arrested. The firm would be dismantled. Michael would lose everything. His career, his reputation, possibly his freedom if they determined he'd knowingly participated in the laundering operation. But if she didn't cooperate, she'd be obstructing a federal investigation. And Sophia's call meant the FBI was already moving forward. Jessica's silence wouldn't protect anyone now. It would only make her complicit. She called Sarah, needing to hear a friendly voice. Tell me what to do, Jessica said, after explaining the situation. I can't tell you that, Sarah replied gently, but I can tell you what questions to ask yourself. First, do you believe Michael can change? Second, are you willing to stand by him through whatever consequences come? Third, can you live with yourself if you protect him at the cost of justice? Those aren't easy questions. They're not supposed to be. But Jessica, you've spent your entire career advocating for vulnerable people, fighting systems that enable abuse. If you compromise those values now for personal reasons, what does that make you? After they hung up, Jessica knew what she had to do. She spent the next 2 hours making copies of all the files, organizing them chronologically, preparing a summary of how she'd obtained them and what they showed. At 1:30, she drove to Cambridge, parked 3 blocks from the cafe, and walked through the rain with the files in her bag. Agent Rodriguez was already there, mid-40s, wearing a suit that had seen better days, with tired eyes that suggested he'd been working financial crimes for too long. He shook her hand and ordered them both coffee before getting down to business. Tell me everything, he said. Jessica did. She explained Sophia's initial contact, the flash drive, her conversations with Eleanor, William Chen's warning at the wedding. She laid out the evidence methodically, watching Rodriguez take notes and occasionally ask clarifying questions. This is substantial, he said when she finished. With this documentation, we can get warrants, start building a case. But I need to be honest with you, Michael Reyes is going to be caught in this. Even if he wasn't directly involved in the laundering, his position at the firm makes him legally vulnerable. What if he cooperates, testifies against Richard? Rodriguez considered that. It would help. Cooperation always helps. But he'd still likely face charges, conspiracy, maybe some financial fraud counts depending on what we find. He'd be looking at prison time, though probably reduced if he flips. Jessica felt sick. How much time? Hard to say. Could be anywhere from 18 months to 5 years depending on his level of involvement and how good his lawyer is. She'd imagined this scenario abstractly, but hearing the concrete details made it viscerally real. Michael in prison, his life destroyed, their future obliterated, and she would be the one who'd caused it. What about Elena? Jessica asked. Richard's wife. She has information too, but she's too scared to come forward. We can offer her protection, immunity in exchange for testimony. If she's willing to testify against both Morales and Chen, we can put her in witness protection, give her a new identity. But she'd have to give up everything, her marriage, her life in Boston, contact with her sister. Jessica thought about Elena's words at the wedding. Love is the story we tell ourselves to make the calculation bearable. If Elena testified, she'd be choosing survival over that story, admitting that the marriage was never about love at all. "When do you need my decision?" Jessica asked. "I already have it. You brought me the files." Rodriguez closed his notebook. "The question now is whether Michael cooperates voluntarily, or we arrest him and let him make the choice from a jail cell. If you want to help him, convince him to come in before we show up with handcuffs." Jessica nodded numbly. They exchanged contact information, and Rodriguez left her with a card and instructions to have Michael call within 48 hours. She sat in the cafe for another hour, staring at her phone, trying to find the words for the call she needed to make. Finally, she dialed Michael's number. "Hey," he answered, sounding cautious. "Are you okay?" "No. Can you come home? We need to talk." "I'm in a meeting with Richard. Can it wait until tonight?" "It can't wait. Please, Michael. It's important." Something in her voice must have conveyed the urgency. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Jessica drove home through the rain, her hands shaking on the wheel. By the time Michael arrived, she'd rehearsed what to say a dozen times, but none of the versions felt adequate. He came in looking worried, his hair wet from the rain. "What's wrong?" "The FBI contacted me today. They're investigating Richard for money laundering. They know about Morales, about the offshore accounts, everything." The color drained from Michael's face. "How?" "Sophia went to them, and I gave them the evidence, the files she'd given me." Michael stared at her like she was a stranger. "You what?" "I gave them the files. I didn't have a choice, Michael. They were already investigating. If I'd refused to cooperate, I'd be obstructing justice." "You betrayed me." His voice was flat, shocked. "You destroyed my life. I'm trying to save it." Jessica's own voice rose. "Agent Rodriguez said if you cooperate now, voluntarily, it will go better for you. You can testify against Richard, get a reduced sentence." "A reduced sentence? I'm going to prison." "Probably. Yes. I'm sorry, but yes." Tears streamed down Jessica's face. "But if you turn yourself in, if you help them build the case, it won't be as bad. You could be out in 2 years, maybe less, with good behavior." 2 years? Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. 2 years in federal prison, my career over, my reputation destroyed, and you did this. You chose to destroy me rather than protect me." "I chose the truth," Jessica shouted. "I chose to do the right thing instead of being complicit in criminal activity. What did you expect me to do? Lie to federal agents? Obstruct an investigation? Become a criminal myself to protect you from consequences you earned?" Michael grabbed his keys from the counter. "I need to leave." "Where are you going?" "To warn Richard. To figure out what to do." "I don't know." He looked at her with an expression of profound betrayal. "I thought you loved me. I do love you. That's why I'm being honest with you now, instead of letting you get arrested without warning. If you loved me, you would have protected me. That's what partners do. They protect each other, even when it's hard, even when it costs them something. Not at the expense of justice, not when it means enabling criminal activity that hurts people." Michael's laugh was bitter. Such noble principles. "I hope they keep you warm at night, because I won't be there. We're done, Jessica. The engagement is off. I can't marry someone who would do this to me." He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Jessica stood in the empty kitchen, listening to his car start, watching through the window as he drove away. She'd known this was a possibility. She'd prepared herself for it. But the reality of his absence, the finality of his words, hit her harder than she'd expected. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Elena. Sophia told me what you did. We need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow? Thinking Cup, 10 a.m. Jessica texted back. "I'll be there." She spent the rest of the evening mechanically packing Michael's belongings into boxes. His clothes, his books, the small personal items that had accumulated in their shared space over 2 years. Each item was a reminder of the life they'd planned, the future they'd imagined. Around midnight, her phone rang again. "Agent Rodriguez. Did you talk to Michael?" he asked. "Yes, he's not going to cooperate. He went to warn Richard instead." Rodriguez sighed. "That's unfortunate, but not surprising. We'll move forward with arrests tomorrow morning. Both Richard Chen and Michael Reyes will be taken into custody. I wanted to give you a heads up in case Michael tries to contact you. Thank you for telling me. Miss Hartwell, you did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel that way right now, but you did." After hanging up, Jessica sat in the darkened living room, Michael's packed boxes surrounding her like monuments to failure. She'd done the right thing. She'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over personal loyalty. But God, it hurt. The thinking cup was crowded with morning commuters when Jessica arrived at 10 o'clock Tuesday. She spotted Elena in the back corner, wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Even from across the room, Jessica could see the tension in her posture. "Thank you for meeting me," Elena said as Jessica sat down. She didn't remove the sunglasses. "Of course. Elena, I'm sorry." "Don't." Elena held up a hand. "Don't apologize. I need to understand why you did it. Why you gave the FBI information that's going to destroy my marriage and possibly get me killed." Jessica felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, get you killed?" Elena leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Morales has people everywhere. The FBI isn't as secure as they think. When word gets out that there's evidence connecting him to Richard, he'll assume I'm the source. I'm the only person who worked directly for both of them. He'll come for me. The FBI can protect you. They offered witness protection. I don't want witness protection." Eleanor's voice rose, then dropped again as other patrons glanced their way. "I don't want a new identity in some small town in Wisconsin. I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if Morales found me. I want the life I built here, the marriage I chose, the security I finally found." Even if that security was an illusion. Eleanor finally removed her sunglasses, and Jessica saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "It wasn't an illusion. Richard loved me. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not purely, but he loved me. And now that's gone because you decided to play hero." "I didn't play hero," Jessica said quietly. "Sophia contacted the FBI. I just provided evidence they would have found eventually anyway. But you could have warned me. You could have given me time to prepare, to figure out how to protect myself. Instead, I woke up this morning to Richard being arrested in our home. Federal agents tearing through our house, seizing computers and files. They told me I'm a person of interest, that I need to get a lawyer, that my cooperation would be appreciated. They destroyed everything in one morning." Jessica felt the weight of that reality. She'd focused so much on the moral calculation, right versus wrong, justice versus complicity, that she hadn't fully considered the human cost. Eleanor's terror was real and justified. "What are you going to do?" Jessica asked. "I don't know." Eleanor's hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "Rodriguez, the FBI agent, he came to see me after Richard's arrest, said if I testify against both Richard and Morales, they'll give me immunity and protection. But testifying means admitting I was Morales' accountant, that I knowingly processed his drug money for years. It means destroying any chance of a normal life, and it means Richard will hate me forever. Does Richard's opinion still matter? Of course it matters." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I love him. That's what you don't understand. Yes, I married him partially for protection. Yes, I knew he had ulterior motives, but I also loved him. I loved the way he saw potential in me when I was at my lowest. I loved how he made me feel safe, that love was real, even if the circumstances were complicated." Jessica understood that in a way she hadn't before. Her own love for Michael hadn't disappeared just because she'd turned him in. If anything, the pain she felt was proof of how deep that love ran. "The FBI agent said you could help me," Elena continued. "That you have some kind of social work background, that you understand trauma and difficult choices. I need someone to help me think through this clearly, without judgment. Can you do that?" It was an impossible request. Jessica had already judged Eleanor's choices, had participated in dismantling her life, but she also understood desperation, understood the impossible calculations people made when all their options were terrible. "I can try," Jessica said. They spent the next 2 hours talking through Elena's options. Cooperate fully with the FBI, which would mean immunity, but also constant fear that Morales would find her despite protection. Refuse to cooperate, which might mean criminal charges and definitely meant losing any leverage with prosecutors. Try to make a deal that gave the FBI some information without fully implicating herself, though Rodriguez had made clear that half measures wouldn't be accepted. "What would you do?" Elena asked finally. "If you were me," Jessica thought about it carefully. "I'd cooperate. Not because it's easy, or because the outcome is guaranteed to be good, but because it's the only choice that puts you on the right side of the truth. You've been running from what you know for 2 years. Maybe it's time to stop running. Even if it costs me everything? You've already lost everything, Jessica said gently. Richard's going to prison. Your marriage is over whether you testify or not. The question is whether you use what you know to help stop people like Morales from hurting others, or whether you stay silent and let the fear win. Elena wiped her eyes. Sophia said the same thing. She's been begging me to testify since yesterday. But it's easy for her to say she's not the one who'll be in danger. Actually, she might be, Jessica pointed out. If Morales thinks you're the source of the leak, he might go after your sister to pressure you. Cooperating with the FBI means they can protect both of you. That argument seemed to land in a way the others hadn't. Elena nodded slowly. I need to talk to Rodriguez again. Ask about specifics, what protection looks like, what happens to Sophia, whether there's any scenario where I can stay in Boston. I can go with you if you want, for moral support. Elena looked surprised. Why would you help me? After everything? Because you're in an impossible situation, largely because of choices other people made. Yes, you worked for Morales, and that was wrong. But you were also trying to survive, and now you have a chance to make it right. You shouldn't have to face that alone. They arranged to meet with Rodriguez that afternoon. Elena went home to get the copies of records she'd kept, the insurance policy she'd been too afraid to use until now. Jessica walked back to her apartment through the cold morning, thinking about the chain of choices that had led them all here. Sophia's desperate attempt to save her sister, Jessica's decision to investigate rather than trust, Michael's loyalty to Richard over ethics, Elena's choice of security over principle, Richard's willingness to build success on criminal foundations. None of them were purely heroes or villains. They were all just people navigating impossible situations with imperfect information and competing needs. When she got home, there was a message from Michael on her voicemail. His voice was strained, formal. I've hired a lawyer. He says I shouldn't talk to you without him present, but I wanted you to know that I'm not cooperating with the FBI. I'm not testifying against Richard. Whatever happens, I'm not betraying the person who believed in me when no one else did. You made your choice. I'm making mine. Don't contact me again. Jessica saved the message, knowing she'd probably listened to it 100 times, analyzing every word for hints of the man she'd loved underneath the anger. That afternoon, she accompanied Elena to the FBI office in Chelsea. Rodriguez met them in a conference room, bringing another agent named Kim Tran, who specialized in witness protection. Elena laid out everything she knew: account numbers, transaction patterns, meetings she'd witnessed between Morales and Richard. She explained the structure of Morales' organization, named key players, described how the money moved from street-level drug sales through various businesses before being laundered through Richard's firm. This is excellent, Rodriguez said when she finished. With your testimony and the financial records Jessica provided, we can build a RICO case against Morales' entire organization. We're talking about dozens of arrests, asset seizures, a real impact on East Coast drug trafficking. And what happens to me? Elena asked. Agent Tran took over. We'll start with protective custody while the case is built. You'll be relocated temporarily to a secure facility, no contact with anyone outside your immediate family. Once indictments come down, we'll move you into formal witness protection, new identity, new location, financial support for the first year while you establish yourself. Can Sophia come with me? If she wants to. But she'd have to give up her life here too, her job, her friends, any romantic relationships, and you'd both have to cut contact with everyone from your previous life. That means no communication with Richard, no closure, no final conversations. Eleanor's face crumpled. I don't get to say goodbye. I'm sorry, Tran said gently, but any contact creates vulnerability. Morales has sophisticated surveillance capabilities. We can't risk him tracking you through communication with known associates. Jessica watched Elena process this, saw her cycle through grief and fear and resignation. This was what truth cost sometimes, not just abstract justice, but concrete human loss. When do I have to decide? Elena asked. We need to move you into protective custody tonight, Rodriguez said. The indictments will be unsealed tomorrow morning. Once that happens, Morales will know something's coming. We can't risk leaving you exposed. Tonight. Elena looked at Jessica. Can you do something for me? Can you go to my apartment and get some things? Photos, my mother's jewelry, a few personal items. They'll let you bring one bag into protective custody. Jessica agreed. After the meeting, she took Elena's keys and drove to the South Boston apartment Elena and Richard had shared. It was a beautiful space. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of urban living that cost thousands a month. Federal agents had already searched it, leaving subtle signs of their presence in the slightly disturbed order. Jessica packed the items Eleanor had requested, moving through rooms that held the evidence of a life abruptly ended. Wedding photos on the mantel, Richard's suit still hanging in the closet, the mundane details of domesticity, toothbrushes in a holder, shared coffee mugs, a grocery list on the refrigerator. On the bedside table, Jessica found a journal. She knew she shouldn't read it, but curiosity won out. The entries were sporadic, dating back to Elena's first weeks with Richard. January 15th. He took me to dinner at a real restaurant. I cried in the bathroom because I haven't eaten food like that in 2 years. I don't know if what I feel is love or just gratitude, but does it matter? Either way, he's saving me. March 3rd. Richard told me he loves me. I think I love him too, though I'm afraid to trust it. What if I'm just attaching to whoever offers safety? What if I'm broken in ways I can't recognize? April 22nd. We're getting married. Sophia thinks I'm insane. Maybe I am, but this feels right. Richard knows my past, knows my fears, and wants me anyway. That has to mean something. The last entry was from 3 days before the wedding. I'm terrified, not of the marriage but of losing it. I've built my whole sense of safety around Richard. What happens if he leaves? What happens if Morales finds me? What happens if this is all too good to be real? I need to believe that second chances exist, that people can escape their past, that love can overcome impossible circumstances. I need to believe that, or I'll drown. Jessica closed the journal, placed it carefully in Elena's bag. The woman who'd written those words wasn't a villain or a gold digger. She was someone desperately trying to build a life from ruins, making impossible calculations about survival and happiness. That evening, Jessica delivered the bag to the FBI office. Eleanor was already there, looking small and scared in an interrogation room that had been repurposed as a temporary holding space. "Thank you," Eleanor said, hugging the bag. "Did you get the journal?" "I did. Elena, I read some of it. I hope that's okay." "What did you think?" "I think you loved him. Really loved him. And I'm sorry that love wasn't enough to make this work." Elena smiled sadly. "Love is never enough on its own, is it? You need compatible values, aligned priorities, similar views on right and wrong. Richard and I had love, but we didn't have the rest. Maybe you and Michael were the same way." Jessica nodded, feeling the truth of that. She and Michael had loved each other, but they'd fundamentally disagreed about what mattered more: comfort or integrity, loyalty or justice, survival or principles. "What will you do now?" Elena asked. "After all this is over?" "I don't know. Probably throw myself into work, try to remember who I was before Michael, figure out if I can live with the choices I made." "Do you regret it, turning them in?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused. But I don't regret the choice itself. Some things are worth the cost." They said goodbye, and Jessica watched as Agent Tran led Elena away, beginning the process that would erase her identity and scatter her to some unknown corner of the country. Jessica drove home through the dark, thinking about truth and consequences, about the price of doing the right thing. She'd destroyed her own relationship and Elena's marriage. She'd sent Michael to prison and Richard with him. She'd upended lives and created new traumas in the name of justice, but she'd also stopped a criminal operation. She'd given Elena a chance at real safety instead of the illusion Richard had provided. She'd chosen integrity over comfort. Whether that made her a hero or just someone who'd made the least terrible choice from a menu of terrible options, she couldn't yet say. But at least she could live with herself, and in the end, perhaps that was enough. 3 months passed. Winter settled over Boston, with the kind of cold that made Jessica's morning walk to the subway feel like an Arctic expedition. The city took on its grey winter character. Slush-covered streets, early darkness, everyone hunched against the wind. The trials had begun. Richard Chen faced federal charges of money laundering and racketeering. Michael had been indicted on conspiracy charges. 17 members of Victor Morales' organization had been arrested in coordinated raids across 3 states. The news coverage was extensive, with financial reporters analyzing how the scheme had worked and legal experts predicting outcomes. Jessica had testified before the grand jury, a surreal experience of recounting her investigation, while lawyers asked pointed questions about her motivations and methods. Some painted her as a hero, others as someone who'd betrayed her fiancé for moral superiority. The truth, she knew, was more complicated than either narrative. Michael had refused to speak to her since his arrest. His lawyer had filed motions to keep Jessica from testifying at trial, arguing that spousal privilege should apply since they'd been engaged. The motions were denied. The engagement ring sitting in Jessica's jewelry box wasn't legally binding. She'd heard through mutual acquaintances that Michael had taken a plea deal, agreeing to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was looking at 18 months in minimum security federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. His career in finance was over. He'd been disbarred from working with investment firms, his reputation permanently damaged. Richard had refused to cooperate, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His trial was scheduled for April. Legal experts predicted he'd get 12 to 15 years. Elena had disappeared into witness protection. Sophia had chosen not to join her, remaining in Boston but severing contact as required by the program. Jessica had seen her once on the street in Cambridge, and they'd shared a brief, sad smile before going their separate ways. They both carried the weight of choices that had saved Elena, but cost them their relationship with her. Jessica had thrown herself into work, taking on the most difficult cases at the hospital: children in foster care, families navigating homelessness, situations where there were no good options, and her job was simply to find the least harmful path forward. The work was exhausting but familiar. It reminded her why she'd chosen this profession in the first place, because someone needed to advocate for people with no other voice. On a Thursday evening in late January, Jessica was leaving the hospital when she noticed a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. Michael stood under a streetlight, hands in his coat pockets, looking thinner and older than he had 3 months ago. "Hi," he said as she approached. "I hope it's okay that I came. I knew your schedule hadn't changed." Jessica's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you need?" "To talk. Just for a few minutes." "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking anyway." They walked to a coffee shop down the street, neither speaking until they were seated with drinks they wouldn't finish. "I'm sorry," Michael said finally, "for how I acted when you told me about the FBI, for the things I said, for how I ended our engagement. You were right, and I was too proud and too scared to admit it." Jessica felt tears threatening, but pushed them back. "Thank you for saying that. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did, why I made the choices I made. I told myself I was being loyal to Richard, but really, I was just protecting my own comfort. I liked the money and the status too much to ask hard questions about where it came from." "We all make compromises," Jessica said quietly. "Not like that. Not compromises that enable actual harm. You tried to tell me that, but I couldn't hear it." He looked down at his coffee. "The prosecutor showed me transcripts during the plea negotiations. Communications between Richard and Morales discussing debt collection. There was violence, Jessica. People who couldn't pay were beaten, sometimes worse. And the money that financed that violence, some of it came through accounts I managed. I helped make it possible. You didn't know. I should have known. I chose not to look because looking would have meant making difficult choices. You didn't have that luxury. You saw the truth and you acted on it, even though it cost you everything. That's the kind of integrity I claimed to have but didn't." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, snow had started falling, large wet flakes that would turn to slush by morning. "What happens now?" Jessica asked. "With your case?" "I report to prison in March. 18 months at FCI Cumberland in Maryland. It's minimum security, not as bad as it could be, but it's still prison." He smiled without humor. "I'll have a lot of time to think about the person I want to be when I get out." "And after?" "I don't know. I can't work in finance anymore. Maybe I'll go back to school, get a teaching certificate. Maybe I'll do something completely different. But whatever it is, it will be honest work. No more gray areas, no more convenient blindness." Jessica wanted to reach across the table to comfort him, but she knew that wasn't her role anymore. They weren't partners. They were two people who'd loved each other, but couldn't reconcile their fundamental differences about right and wrong. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said sincerely. "I hope you do too." Michael stood to leave, then paused. "Can I ask you something? Do you think there was any scenario where we could have made it work? Where I could have been the person you needed me to be?" Jessica considered the question. "Maybe. if you'd made different choices earlier, if you'd walked away from Richard when you first suspected what he was doing, if you'd been honest with me from the start. But those aren't the choices you made, and I don't think you were capable of making them at the time. We were fundamentally incompatible in the ways that mattered most. Yeah, he smiled sadly. For what it's worth, I loved you. I love you still. That was never a lie. I know. I loved you too. That's why this hurt so much. He left, and Jessica sat alone in the coffee shop, watching the snow accumulate on the sidewalk. She felt grief, but also a strange sense of peace. Some chapters needed to close, some relationships needed to end, for people to grow into who they were meant to become. A month later, Jessica attended Richard's trial as a spectator. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and curious onlookers. Richard sat at the defense table looking composed but diminished, the confidence he'd radiated at his wedding replaced with careful control. Elena's video testimony was played for the jury. She appeared on screen from an undisclosed location, her face visible but her surroundings obscured. She spoke calmly, detailing the money laundering scheme, explaining how she'd processed Morales' drug profits, describing the fear that had kept her silent for so long. When the prosecutor asked why she'd finally decided to testify, Elena's composure cracked slightly. Because silence made me complicit, because I couldn't live with knowing I'd let evil continue for the sake of my own comfort, because Jessica Hartwell showed me that doing the right thing matters more than being safe. Richard's eyes found Jessica in the gallery during that testimony. She couldn't read his expression. Anger, betrayal, resignation, some combination of all three. But she held his gaze, refusing to look away. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Richard received 14 years in federal prison and millions in fines. His father, who'd sat through every day of the trial with stone-faced dignity, left without speaking to reporters. Jessica went home that evening and poured herself a glass of wine she didn't drink. She'd won, in the sense that justice had been served. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like necessary loss, like choosing to amputate a diseased limb to save the body. Her phone rang, an unknown number, but she answered anyway. Jessica, it's Elena. The surprise of hearing her voice made Jessica sit down. How are you? Safe, alive, starting over in a place I can't tell you about. Elena's voice was steady but sad. I watched the verdict on the news. Thank you for testifying. I didn't do it for thanks. I know. You did it because it was right. That's who you are. Elena paused. I wanted you to know. I don't regret it. Testifying, I mean. Losing Richard hurts, and losing my old life is hard. But I can look at myself in the mirror now. That's worth more than I realized. What will you do now? Build something new. I've enrolled in community college, studying accounting again, but this time for non-profits who need help, not criminals who need cover. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. And I'm volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others who've been through what I went through. That's wonderful, Elena. It's terrifying, but I'm learning that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. You taught me that. After they hung up, Jessica walked to her bedroom window and looked out over the city. Boston at night was a constellation of lights, thousands of lives intersecting in ways both visible and hidden. She thought about all the choices that had led to this moment, hers, Michael's, Elena's, Richard's, each person navigating their own moral calculus, trying to balance survival and integrity, love and justice. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, Jessica received a letter forwarded through the FBI. The return address was blocked, but she recognized Elena's handwriting. Dear Jessica, I'm writing this from my new life, though I can't tell you where or who I've become. The witness protection program is strange, like being reborn but carrying all your old memories with you. Sometimes I forget to respond to my new name. Sometimes I wake up and momentarily forget that Richard is in prison, that our marriage is over, that Sophia can't call me on my birthday. But I'm okay, more than okay actually. I'm free in a way I've never been before, not just free from Morales' threats, but free from the constant fear that defined my life for so long. I don't have to look over my shoulder anymore. I don't have to wonder if the person I love is using me. I don't have to compromise my values for safety. The therapist they assigned me says I'm processing trauma, that it will take years to fully heal from everything I experienced. But she also says I'm resilient. that I made brave choices when it mattered. I think about you when she says that. You made brave choices too, and they cost you just as much as mine cost me. I hope you've found peace. I hope you've forgiven yourself for whatever guilt you carry, because Jessica, you saved my life, not just from Morales but from myself, from the cage I was building out of fear and desperation. You gave me a second chance at building a life based on truth instead of survival. Thank you for that. Thank you for being brave when I couldn't be. Thank you for showing me that integrity matters, even when it's expensive. I won't write again. The program doesn't allow ongoing contact. But I wanted you to know that somewhere in this country, there's a woman who thinks of you with gratitude, who's trying every day to be worthy of the sacrifice you made. Take care of yourself. You deserve happiness. Eleanor Jessica read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in the box where she kept important documents. It was closure, of a sort. Not the neat resolution that movies promised, but the messy, incomplete closure that real life offered. That spring, Jessica made changes. She left Children's Hospital and took a position with a non-profit that helped domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. The work was challenging, but aligned perfectly with her values, advocating for people trapped in impossible situations, helping them find paths towards safety and autonomy. She also started dating again, though cautiously. A colleague introduced her to David, a public defender who shared her commitment to justice and her understanding that the world rarely offered simple moral choices. They took things slowly, building friendship before romance, learning each other's values and boundaries before making commitments. 1 year after the wedding that had changed everything, Jessica visited Michael at FCI Cumberland. She'd thought about it for months before requesting the visit, unsure whether seeing him would help or hurt, but something in her needed the conversation, needed to see how he'd changed during his time inside. The prison visiting room was depressingly institutional. Plastic chairs, vending machines, corrections officers watching carefully. Michael appeared looking thinner but healthier somehow, as if the months in prison had stripped away a layer of pretense. "Thank you for coming," he said, sitting across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either, but I wanted to see how you were doing." They talked for an hour about mundane things, his prison work assignment teaching GED classes to other inmates, her new job, the Red Sox's disappointing season. It was only near the end of the visit that they addressed the deeper questions. "I've been reading a lot," Michael said. "Philosophy mostly, trying to understand how I convinced myself that what I was doing was acceptable. There's this concept called moral licensing, where people do something they perceive as good and then use that to justify doing something bad. I told myself that because I grew up poor and worked hard, I'd earned the right to ignore where the money came from. That's honest self-reflection. Prison gives you time for honesty. Not much else to do." He smiled slightly. "My lawyer thinks I'll get early release for good behavior. I could be out in 6 months. I've been thinking about what comes next. And I want to work with kids from backgrounds like mine, mentor them, help them understand that there are paths forward that don't require compromising who you are, maybe prevent some of them from making my mistakes." Jessica felt something lift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or validation. That sounds meaningful. It's the least I can do. I can't undo the harm I enabled, but I can try to prevent future harm. It's not redemption exactly, but it's a start. When the visit ended and Jessica walked back to her car, she felt a sense of completion. Michael wasn't the man she'd fallen in love with, but he was becoming someone better, someone who'd faced his failures and chosen growth over bitterness. That evening, Jessica had dinner with Sarah, who'd supported her through every stage of the past year's chaos. "You seem lighter," Sarah observed over Ethiopian food in Davis Square. "More settled." "I am. I finally feel like I can breathe without carrying the weight of what happened." "Do you regret any of it?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain everyone experienced. I regret that Elena had to give up her entire life. I regret that Michael's in prison. But I don't regret the choices I made. They were the right choices, even if the consequences were hard." "That's growth," Sarah said. "Understanding that doing the right thing doesn't mean everything works out perfectly. It just means you can live with yourself." They talked late into the night about other things. Sarah's own complicated relationship with a surgeon at her hospital, department politics, vacation plans, normal life resuming after extraordinary circumstances. 2 years after the trials, Jessica received a notification that Richard Chen's appeal had been denied. He would serve his full sentence minus time for good behavior, meaning approximately 11 more years in federal prison. She felt neither satisfaction nor sadness at the news, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, however imperfect, had been served. She'd heard through former colleagues that Richard had become deeply religious in prison, attending chapel services and Bible studies. Whether that represented genuine transformation or simply another survival strategy, she couldn't say. People were complicated, capable of both tremendous selfishness and unexpected growth. On the 3rd anniversary of Richard and Elena's wedding, Jessica walked along the Charles River at sunset. The water reflected pink and gold, and runners and cyclists passed by in the warm September air. She thought about all the lives that had intersected that day at the yacht club, all the choices that had radiated outward like ripples. Eleanor was somewhere building a new life, free from fear. Michael was working with at-risk youth, trying to atone through service. Richard was in prison, facing the consequences of his choices. Sophia had moved to California, starting fresh in a place without painful memories. William Chen had retired, the scandal having tarnished the family name he'd spent decades building. And Jessica? She'd built a life based on integrity, found love with someone who shared her values, and learned that doing the right thing rarely felt heroic in the moment. It just felt necessary. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner at my place? I'm making that pasta you like." Jessica smiled and texted back, "On my way." She walked toward the subway, leaving the river behind. The city lights were beginning to glow in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the urban sprawl, millions of people were making their own choices about right and wrong, about loyalty and truth, about what they could live with and what they couldn't. Jessica had made her choices. She'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over loyalty, integrity over ease. Those choices had cost her a relationship, caused pain to people she cared about, and forced her to accept uncomfortable realities about moral complexity. But she could look at herself in the mirror. She could sleep at night without the weight of complicity. She could build a future on foundations of honesty, rather than convenient blindness. In the end, that was enough. Not perfect, not painless, but enough. The truth had arrived on cue, and Jessica had chosen to speak it. Whatever else happened, whatever the cost, that choice defined who she was and who she would continue to be. And sometimes, in an imperfect world, being able to live with your choices was the closest thing to redemption you could find.